Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today our family is in Juneau, Alaska, and we're taking the opportunity to have a look at Mendenhall Glacier. Mendenhall Glacier is one of many glaciers here in the state of Alaska. It's a truly beautiful place and a great place to have a look at another psalm. Let's read Psalm 53 together. The fool says in his heart, "There is no God. They are corrupt, doing abominable iniquity. There is none who does good." God looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all fallen away. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Have those who work evil no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon God? There they are in great terror where there is no terror. For God scatters the bones of him who encamps against you. You put them to shame, for God has rejected them. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. When God restores the fortunes of his people, let Jacob rejoice. Let Israel be glad. As we look today at Psalm 53, are you getting a sense of deja vu? If you've been following the study of the book of Psalms since the beginning, and you've studied with us Psalm 14, you'll notice that the words of Psalm 53 are almost exactly the same as the words of Psalm 14. In fact, there are just a few differences, and I'll go ahead and point those out because they're going to be important for what we have to say about this psalm today. As we look through the words of the psalm, we notice that the word of Psalm 14:1, deeds, has been replaced with the word iniquity in Psalm 53. We notice in verse 2, and from verse 2 onward really, that the word Lord, which in Psalm 14 in most versions will be in all capitalized letters, meaning that it is the covenant name of God, Yahweh or Jehovah, Lord is replaced in Psalm 14. In Psalm 53 it's replaced with the word God, and that again remains consistent throughout the psalm. In verse 3, in Psalm 14, it says they have turned aside, but in verse 3 it says they have fallen away. Now there is a question that is asked in verse 4. In the English Standard Version, it has those questions being worded differently, but not truly being different. But in other versions, it's borne out that in Psalm 14, he says all, but whereas in Psalm 53, he says only they. In other words, a specific group as opposed to everyone. In verse 5, though, you come across what really is the key difference of the psalm, where the wordings are really, really different. In fact, verse 5 in Psalm 53 is split into two verses in Psalm 14. But the real difference there is who is being addressed with this statement. In Psalm 14:6, there is an address to the wicked, but in Psalm 53, the address instead is to the faithful. God scatters the bones of him who encamps against you. That you is the faithful to whom the psalmist is speaking and who the psalmist is hoping is being encouraged by these words. In Psalm 14, that general nature of verse 5 in Psalm 53 is borne out again as it relates to that first statement. It says they are simply afraid. Whereas in Psalm 53, the psalmist is encouraging his audience to picture them being afraid. There they are in great terror, where there is no terror. There is no terror at the moment, but the eyes of the psalmist, which he encourages to pass along to the readers, see them being in terror. They're not in terror at this moment, but they will be. And that kind of helps you to understand what's happening in this psalm. You know as well as I do, if you've been attending the services of the Lord's Church for any length of time, we have old songs and we have newer songs. But have you ever noticed how sometimes those new songs will incorporate the language of the old songs and sometimes even take that almost word for word into the modern world, but just update the tune maybe? That happens all the time. And what I can understand from this psalm is that it probably happened all the time amongst God's people throughout the ages. The audience of one of these psalms took the language found in the other psalm and incorporated it into their setting. Now, which came first? I don't know that I can say for sure, but I tend to believe that Psalm 14 came first because of the generic nature. And then in Psalm 53, the psalmist is incorporating that language and bringing it to a generation that truly needs that message. There are people that seem to be getting away with the fact that they have given up on God and forgotten him altogether. But the psalmist says they're not going to defeat us. They're not going to overcome us. It is they who are afraid, not us. I appreciate another thing about this psalm. Did you notice that back in verse 2, as I pointed out, the word God is stated instead of the word Jehovah or Yahweh? You say, well, why did they make that change? There's one song that sometimes appears in camp songbooks and also appears in real songbooks, and it's a song, As the Deer Pants for the Water. And the question with that song is, do we say the these and thous? Some versions have it, some versions don't. I remember when I was attending preaching school, I encountered a lot of people who, when they prayed, they said these and thous, and I prayed accommodatively when I prayed in front of audiences, using these and thous to respect their wishes. And I think that that's a wonderful point to make from this psalm. Now, I know that there's not a difference of thee and thou, but there is a difference perhaps in whether or not they felt comfortable saying the covenant name of God. They changed it from that covenant name to the more generic name, perhaps out of respect for God, perhaps because they didn't feel comfortable addressing Him using that name. I've heard traditions before of scribes when they were copying down the books of the Old Testament that come across that what's sometimes called the tetragrammaton, the Yahweh or Jehovah. They would write that word and they would throw away their pen out of respect. Perhaps the audience of Psalm 53 respects God in that way. Is Psalm 14 wrong for using the covenant name of the Lord? Well, absolutely not. But Psalm 53, they chose to respect God in that way, and I appreciate them for doing so and God for preserving it for us. But again, I appreciate also what's happening in this psalm. Again, as I've said, he's incorporating an older psalm into his present day and using the words that are found in that to address real issues for his audience. It's not just the general all, it's a specific group that the psalmist is concerned with and that his audience needs to be encouraged in regards to. I encourage you to go back in your psalm books, look at the words of those older songs, see the value in those words, and see if you can't bring those words to a new audience. That might mean simply teaching a song, but it might also mean rearranging the words, rearranging the melody, doing something to make that song more meaningful and relevant to the audience today. When we do that, we're doing what people of faith have done throughout the ages. May God bless you today, and may we all think more carefully about the words that we sing and use words in praise to God that are helpful to our audience.